All right, big changes happening in the National Football League. This week, only a couple of teams on bye, but still, we have a few holes that need to be plugged in terms of fantasy football. So let's go through the waiver wire, shall we? Our quarterback this week is Andy Dalton. He'll be facing Washington. Had a decent bounce back last week. I think we saw that there are limitations with Andy Dalton. If his team isn't, if you're facing a good defense, his team isn't good enough, and he's not good enough to, overcome that. But if Andy Dalton is going out there and facing bad defenses, which I would categorize Washington as, then, hey, look at this, Andy Dalton has some fantasy value. And so I think this week will be a good week for Dalton, for Deontay Johnson, and even a little bit for Xavier Legette, who didn't make the waiver wire list here, but I do think is if you're desperate move for sure. Coming in at wide receiver, we do have Darius Slayton, 33% owned. They'll be facing Philadelphia, which is not a matchup that scares you. And he has had 11 targets in back-to-back weeks. Now, we'll see what happens with Malik Neighbors, but I do think that there are going to be some opportunities for Darius Slayton, regardless of Neighbors' status. We may have forgotten the last time we saw Juju Smith-Schuster out on the field, he was ripping it up. And we probably just saw his last game, but he is still only 33% owned. And I think he has to potentially get some pretty good volume and kind of help this offense move forward. So I think that Juju Smith-Schuster still has fantasy football value and still should be picked up. Rashad Bateman at 11% owned. 12 targets, 8 receptions the last 2 games, facing a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that gives up a lot of fantasy points. So I think you can... I think that he is even someone you would probably consider starting this week. We're not missing a ton of great wide receivers, I don't think, from a fantasy standpoint, but he is someone that if injuries have been a thing or whatever, I think he can plug into the lineup. And then Demario Douglas has repeated 9 targets and 6 receptions in each of the last 2 games. They're facing a Jacksonville defense that is a struggle, and I think they are going to be able to prop this thing up and kind of get this thing moving. And you saw the difference between 9 receptions and 2 targets 2 weeks ago with Brissett and this week was I think like 40 extra yards and a touchdown. I do think that Drake May worked through some shit in that first half, but is now starting to get a little bit comfortable as that second half went on and starting to understand some things. And again, facing Jacksonville, I think there is going to be some options for Demario Douglas to go off this week. At running back, Tyler Algier, you're kind of chasing it a little bit. He has the really big game for Atlanta. Even without the big explosions, though, he has had the opportunities, and we've kind of been talking about that for a little bit. Facing a Seattle defense that's just okay. At 30% owned, it's a good ad. This one is a bit more of a volume one, and it's also a bit of a monitor as the week goes on. But Ty Chandler, 28% owned. If Aaron Jones is out, then I think Chandler gets a lot of pretty good volume, even though it is a tougher matchup against Detroit. So that one is a bit more of a if you are desperate. At tight end, it's Colby Parkinson, 16% owned. He's against the Raiders, so why not? And on defense, it is New Orleans. Going up against Denver, Bo Nix on a short week. I think that Dennis Allen will be able to game plan some stuff up. Bo Nix comes out of Sunday with a pretty good day, but a lot of that was garbage time. So going up against another good defense in New Orleans, I think he kind of gets limited there. So those are the fantasy football waiver wire options for the week. If you guys ever have any fantasy football questions and you're watching live, let me know in the chat. Or if you're watching after, put them in the comments in the YouTube video. And we'll either answer them at the time or in the next video. Or honestly, probably both.